We are live on air, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Max Dinenberg. Once again, we're joined once again by Joe Baldwin, and we have another movie franchise ranking to do on this show. As you can see down below, moving across your screen, it is the X-Men franchise. That includes the original with Hugh Jackman and those guys, and the James McAvoy's trilogy, and then you also have the Deadpool films as well added in. We do want to preface before we start this ranking that we did not see New Mutants. So we cannot put New Mutants into this ranking. I currently live in Los Angeles, so there's no movie theaters coming here anytime soon. So it's going to be tough to see New Mutants, but in general, that will not make this list. There are 12 movies, so it's going to take a little bit. But Joe, kick us off. What, in your opinion, is the worst X-Men film?
I have to say, I just want to preface this. This is the first time I feel like we've ever done a list where I'm gonna go negative, but my number 12 is Dark Phoenix, and oh my god, it's not a great movie. I mean, this is the thing is like I went into Dark Phoenix, I went into it late, so people had already told me it's like it's not great. So I went in expecting it to be not great, and I was right, and it's just truly. It's pretty forgettable. I don't remember a lot of the main points. They're trying to redo the Phoenix Saga, which is a beloved comic arc, and beloved comic arcs usually are hard to live up to. But this is just, I mean, I don't really know what else to say about it without again spoiling some of my list down the road. But it's just these characters. We don't get to know them that much. Like the character we know the best throughout the entirety of the new X-Men series, not the originals, is McAvoy and Fassbender, and then I guess Nicholas Hoult a little bit. But then we're stuck with all these characters that we met like a movie ago, and we're supposed to care so much about what's happening to them. And it just doesn't really land. I don't want to go too negative, but it's a very forgettable movie.
Yeah, and that will soon be on my list as well. The newest X-Men movie before New Mutants. My number 12 is really easy, and that is X-Men Origins Wolverine. I think it's one of the worst superhero movies of all time, in my opinion. I think it's terrible, like laughably terrible. So this movie had to come off of The Last Stand, and I'll talk about that soon as well. So this movie added, Liev Schreiber. This is the movie with the bad Deadpool in it, where Ryan Reynolds is. I'm just being honest here. Ryan Reynolds his mouth gets shut for some reason, and this movie just it's so bloated with weak CGI, especially in that last fight. Between Liev Schreiber, Sabretooth, and Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. And it feels like we've been here, done that before, of, becoming Wolverine in the movie. Like, it feels like we already had 3 other movies of him growing into it. And this movie just, I don't know. I always don't want to watch this movie. Like, it's always the one I skip the most in my rewatches of X-Men. And it's easily one of the worst Marvel superhero movies, I'll say, of the past 20 years, in my opinion. So that's why that is the worst on my list. Joe, give us your number 11.
My number 11 is X-Men Apocalypse. When I came out of the theater for X-Men Apocalypse, I don't come out of a lot of movies thinking extremely negative things. I just kind of have like maybe a sense of unease. Apocalypse was one of the first movies where I ever like came out of the theater and was just kind of like, that was something. I believe it's far superior to Dark Phoenix because at least like the action is interesting. There are certain battles that are like interesting and fun to watch, and it kind of tricks you into thinking that it's like it's a better movie than it is. It's a grander movie than it is. I just, again, I don't have anything nice to say about it. It has a Quicksilver scene, but it's so cheesy and such a knockoff of the Days of Future Past Quicksilver scene that it's hard to enjoy. Yeah, Oscar Isaac's Apocalypse he does a good job performing it, but it's just a very poorly written character. It's an all-powerful character that doesn't use his all-powerfulness.
Yeah.
He has control of all of the world's nukes, and he sends them into space, and then he tries to destroy the world in a different way. What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it introduces some of these newer characters. Sophie Turner's Jean Grey, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, and they just, they're there.
Yeah.
They're there.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have anything nice to say.
Yeah. And I'll piggyback on your stuff because that is also my number 11, X-Men Apocalypse. I was so annoyed coming out of the theater when I watched this movie because this was kind of the best of the franchise we've gotten. We had First Class, then we got Days of Future Past. Man, the X-Men movies are getting better and better, and then you kind of get landed on with Apocalypse. And as you said, I'm a huge Oscar Isaac fan, but they basically are so lazy in the movie that they say he's going to learn about everything by just touching a TV, and that's how he's going to learn the English language. That's how he's going to learn how pop culture is. It doesn't make any sense. As you said, this is the first movie where you kind of also get Storm into the mix, I believe, in this movie as well, the new Storm. You said so. I think Magneto is the only scene that I like is Magneto's family. Their storyline in this film is actually really great, and some of the best Magneto we've gotten, where Magneto's wife and kid die. That was really powerful, I think. In this movie, the only theme that I like is in that movie was that. This is also the first movie where I thought Jennifer Lawrence was just mailing in a performance. She started with this movie. I'll talk about the other one soon. She just doesn't care in this movie, and you can definitely feel that, especially here in Apocalypse. And it also just feels like as you said, there's way too much going on. They added in a lot of characters that we're already just supposed to know because we watched the first movies. But doesn't mean you can just put them in the movie just to put them in the movie. You need character depth. Quicksilver's always steals scenes, as Joe said earlier, especially in this movie. But Apocalypse, I just always struggle with. It's easily the most forgettable X-Men movie, in my opinion. Almost the worst, but it's pretty bad in my opinion. Let's go on. We have our top 10 here coming up. Joe, what is your number 10?
My number 10, I'm now starting to reconsider as my number 11 because you reminded me of so much of what makes it truly awful. And that's actually Origins of Wolverine. I did not remember this movie. And the more you talked about it, the more I was like, oh my God, it sucked.
Yeah.
I think I watched it when I was a kid, so I was willing to give more leeway to certain elements. Like I didn't recognize bad CGI as well, and I was like, oh, look, it's superpowered people fighting. But that being said, it is still just the most confusing movie. I'm going to second everything you said in your pick as number 12. But also, there's this whole doesn't really fit in. X-Men has a huge timeline issue, but X-Men Origins Wolverine is just blows that even further out of the water. Like they throw Emma Frost in there when Emma Frost then shows up in First Class. They're just all these mutants from all over the movies that are brought in for no reason. Cyclops is in it even. It is a bizarre movie. I do remember liking parts of it, but again, I haven't seen it in ages. And I feel like that's a disclaimer that I should throw out for a lot of these movies, which is I saw a lot of these movies a long time ago and then never saw them again. But yeah. 10 is is X-Men Origins Wolverine, although it probably should be lower.
Yeah, I think it should be lower on your list. My number 10 is X-Men The Last Stand, another god-awful movie in this X-Men franchise. Directed by Brett Ratner as well, so also just disappointing there. This movie it has Hugh Jackman in it, but it starts to recast people too. Like Kelsey Grammer suddenly is Beast, and we're supposed to move on. Also, Cyclops dies, and we just move on. It's kind of one of the more disrespectful deaths I think we've gotten in the X-Men franchise, where one of the characters that you actually love from the first two dies, and we just move on without anyone bringing up that even happened again in the rest of the movie. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And just like Dark Phoenix, as Joe alluded to earlier, this movie just can't nail the Jean Grey Dark Phoenix character. I think a bit worse than Dark Phoenix, because the CGI that they wanted in 2006 just wasn't there as well, and it doesn't look great. The romance that Dark Phoenix had with Jean Grey had with Logan fell apart for me in those last couple of movies. So I really think this is a terrible movie, a movie that thought it was above its time. Especially, everyone was pumped for this movie after X2, and this movie just fell really flat, and that began the runway, basically, of bad X-Men movies. Number 9, Joe.
Number 9 is The Wolverine.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember what happens in this movie. I believe they go to Japan. I do remember that it was better than X-Men Origins Wolverine. I think it actually had some interesting plot points. Unfortunately, I can't remember any of those interesting plot points. I believe it does sort of a Wolverine loses his healing factor, which is just a worse version of what they did in Logan. I think the Silver Samurai is in it.
Yeah.
Maybe I should go back and rewatch it, but then again, I've never heard anyone speak about this movie, ever. I mean, I've heard people speak about X-Men Origins Wolverine because it's bad.
It's awful. Yeah.
But I've never heard anybody talk about this movie, which I assume means it's better than X-Men Origins Wolverine. But I truly do not know or understand the plot of what happened in the Wolverine.
Yeah.
That is number 9.
That's a fair point. I'll talk about that very, very soon. My number 9 is your number 12, which is Dark Phoenix. So I had really mixed feelings with Dark Phoenix. I walked out of the theater. I've watched it, I think, 3 or 4 times now. I just think it's meh. I don't think it's the worst X-Men movie in my opinion. I think there's bad movies in this franchise. I don't think this is a terrible movie because really this cast is so watchable. Fassbender is easily one of my favorite superheroes of all time, portrayals as Magneto. James McAvoy is my favorite actor, has Professor X. As I said earlier, Jennifer Lawrence really shipped in this performance as well. And we got spoiled in the trailer that she was going to die, which again doesn't make any sense with the original trilogy. So, you know what I mean? Mystique dies, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then we have another X-Men movie where Magneto starts on the good side, goes to be the villain, then comes back to being the good side at the end of the day. It just felt very the same movie. Jessica Chastain, too, was wasted in the villain role. She was just a normal person, and some of these aliens just take over her body, I guess. And she's the villain of the movie somehow. I hated the villain. Again, Dark Phoenix. We didn't really get enough of Cyclops and Dark Phoenix in the first in Apocalypse to even gain interest in their love in this movie. And I think Nicholas Hoult is great, but I thought this movie, the most in the franchise, Professor X was so out of character in this movie. He was such a douche in this movie to a whole other level, and that's not Professor X. And again, it doesn't make a lot of sense because 10 years in the timeline, 10 years after Dark Phoenix, James McAvoy is going to turn into Patrick Stewart, and Michael Fassbender is going to turn into Ian McKellen. It doesn't make any sense when you think about this movie. So I just think I think there's some solid. I think the train sequence is really good in my opinion. Of course, that was the one that they just reshot because they needed an action scene. So I really loved that scene. But as a whole, I do love this cast. But this is yet another tough X-Men movie to get through. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I just think it's meh, kind of a meh movie. You're number 8, Joe, or do you want to piggyback on my point?
I do just want to comment on the cast, which is I think hating on a cast is sometimes very unfair. And I don't hate the actors by any regard, but I think that this cast had a lot of potential, but there was never a moment I felt in either Apocalypse or Dark Phoenix where I felt that they were like they showed that potential. Like they had the potential, but they never showed it. And then both of the movies, in my opinion, were very poor. So I think it was a wasted cast. I believe if it was a better crafted movie, these two might have been much higher on the list. That being said, I'm going down to number 8. My number 8 is X-Men: The Last Stand. I'm rating again. I have to throw in my bias of just what I remember, and I remember enough about The Last Stand to put it above the Wolverine, because as I said, I don't remember anything about the Wolverine. The Last Stand, I think it's not the greatest movie, but it does have a cast of characters that we've actually gotten to know and that we actually sort of care about. I do agree. Cyclops dying and then it just like not having an effect, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I do think I believe I've mentioned this. I am very partial to fight scenes, and I think the fights on Alcatraz are very interesting. They make for an all right final battle. That being said, this random group of mutants being the main antagonist it's not optimal. Jean Grey as the Dark Phoenix kind of feels like it's out of nowhere, and that we're actually supposed to know the comics in order to understand it. And if you know the comics, you hate it, and if you don't know the comics, you don't understand it. I think X-Men: The Last Stand gets a little higher on my list, truthfully, just because I did like the first 2 X-Men movies.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up Chilling Movies. He says, Dark Phoenix was all right. I don't hate it nor like it. It had some pretty interesting ideas, but it's just a mess. The train scene was pretty cool. The cast are enjoyable to watch. This movie, too, I was going to bring up this point, too. You don't really care because you know the cast are not coming back again to the franchise. You know, this is it. Not in the way of Endgame where you're like, oh, this might be it for the characters. You just know Fox, because at this point when they shot the movie, Disney-Fox merger kind of screwed this movie to a fact that you'll never see these characters again. And the production had so much issues that everyone knew about it. So I think that also helped. My number 8 is The Wolverine. So The Wolverine comes in number 8, the first kind of solo movie in the X-Men franchise. I think it's a fine movie. Like, I don't think it's bad or anything. I just think it's fine. There are some really great action scenes. And at this point in the franchise, for me, it felt like a pretty different movie. It had a very distinct feel from James Mangold, who's arguably one of the best directors now, following Logan and Ford versus Ferrari. So he's a really good director. But I thought that the Wolverine deleted the deleted scene of them fighting in Japan. There was a deleted scene. It was the best scene in the whole movie, but it was deleted. So you have to watch that scene. Like, I love that scene, but it was deleted from the movie, so I can't judge the movie off. Can't judge that scene into my review of the movie. It just felt very, very rushed, in my opinion. The movie as a whole, there's a lot that has to happen in its runtime of getting to Japan and all of this stuff, and explaining why the Wolverine is here in this moment after The Last Stand. So for me, it's actually one of the more forgettable movies, probably the most forgettable movie, in my opinion, in the entire franchise. I know we're saying a lot of negatives, but I do think we're going to be getting on some great movies really, really soon. Joe, you're number 7.
My number 7, this might be a shock. I don't know, because I'm less acquainted with what is and isn't controversial in X-Men. My number 7 is X2. I really liked X2, but I don't remember everything that happens.
Yeah.
I might not be the best person to rank X-Men movies, but this is my opinion, which is I believe X2 builds really well off of the first X-Men movie. I think it actually does a great job with new character introductions of Nightcrawler. You've got Stryker as the villain and Lady Deathstrike as sort of his right hand. The opening scene, I believe it's the opening scene with Nightcrawler attempting to assassinate the president, is amazing. I love good superpower choreography, and that is how you take advantage of teleportation so beautifully. Unfortunately, I remember there was the raid on the X Mansion. There's sort of the introduction of Iceman and Pyro, and I think Pyro's turn is also very interesting. It's a good depiction of the two sides, the two sides that make up the mutants, the Professor X's X-Men and Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants. I think that idea that you can be right both ways. I mean, even though, the Brotherhood is evil. I did really enjoy the movie. Unfortunately, it's just a movie that I've watched once and not very recently. So it has to be at my number 7.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to do this list. I want to hear your opinion. Like, we don't have to have the same opinion. That's the fun part about this list. It'd be a very boring
video if we had the same list.
Yeah. So my number, where are we at? 7 now? Yes, is the original X-Men, in my opinion, is my number 7. I think it was a good start to this franchise. Like, it's a good movie. Obviously, this is the time where the superhero genre started to really blossom. Blade happened. This happened. Spider-Man really kicked it into gear. But I like this movie a lot. I think it's really solid. I think that, obviously, the casting here, Hugh Jackman, one of the best castings you'll ever see in a superhero movie, as Logan, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, James Marsden. Everyone forgets Halle Berry had a weird accent in this movie. She forgot about it in X2 and the rest of the franchise, but she had like an African accent in this movie. Totally weird, totally not for the character. That's why she dropped it, and that's why this movie always kind of ticks down for me. Ray Park, who played Darth Maul as Toad, was really fun in this movie as well. Some fun action set pieces. And the idea of, Rogue Mystique being involved too, like mismatching, changing into different characters, and the reveals and the twists and turns with her character, I thought were really great in this movie. But again, I think some of the technology doesn't quite hold up with the first movie. It doesn't really feel special, in my opinion. I think a lot more movies in the X-Men movies do feel more special than the first one. But again, I think Magneto and Professor X playing chess at the end of the movie was just picture perfect. I get a really good start to the franchise for a franchise that did get a lot better than its original, which not a lot of franchises can say. Joe, move into your number 6.
My number 6 is the original X-Men. I could rewatch X2 and X-Men and swap them because, again, the original trilogy is not my peak knowledge, but I do remember a lot about the first X-Men movie, and I think it is a great building point for this whole list. And seeing as like a lot of the movies kind of fade off in more recent memory, it is very impressive that they were able to establish such a lasting legacy with this one movie. I think it does a really good job of not shoving exposition down your throat. I wasn't very familiar with the X-Men when I watched this for the first time. So being able to meet all of these characters from the comics in a very quick way while also still having Wolverine and Rogue as the more main characters is a very tricky balancing act. Like, the Avengers is one of the greats in Marvel, but they had to take time to build that up. Team movies take effort, and the way that they were able to establish a team so quickly in this movie, I believe, deserves a lot of recognition. I'm assuming the special effects don't hold up as well, but I believe you can give a certain amount of leeway to that depending on how effective the writing is. I think the way they establish Magneto and Professor X's relationship, their dynamic of friends and enemies at the same time, is very well done, especially without starting as friends, turning to enemies. They're both enemies and friends currently, with very conflicting ideals.
I agree. I think it's a very fascinating way to kick off a franchise, and the kind of the Avengers before the Avengers. The first kind of team up movie that no one really talks about. My number 6 might be controversial, might be my only one, and that is Deadpool 2 coming in number 6. Deadpool 2 can't reach my top 5. I have a lot of issues with this movie. Now, I still think it's a great movie. Like I really love, it's such an easy rewatchable movie. Probably at times more rewatchable than the first one, but the more I watch it, actually, the less I like it. Like I remember I walked in the theater and I loved it, like very close to the first one. And the more I watch it, the more I have issues with the film. Most of them come with the usage of Cable. I wanted Cable to be a bad guy, like a bad guy, but instead of that, he's just a misunderstood anti-hero. And we have Juggernaut as the villain, really, of the movie. And I was kind of disappointed because Josh Brolin is perfect casting as Cable. But I was very disappointed of the way they used Cable in Deadpool 2. And for me, this movie went for way more jokes that didn't land compared to the first one. It felt like the first one, the jokes came more naturally. And in this movie, they just kind of just everyone tell a joke. But as a whole, guys, I still love this movie. I love Zazie Beetz as Domino as well. She was a really fun character to add into this movie. And the twist of Vanessa dying in the opening scene was actually really powerful. A great way to start the film. You think it's going to be a complete comedy, and then it goes into a very dark movie early on. But I think it's a great movie with really funny jokes. I just think that the villain in the first one was a lot more stronger than the villains, I would say, here in the second one. I thought the story kind of went in so many different directions, especially when they wanted to bring in X-Force and they all died like 2 seconds in, which I thought was hilarious. I still love that. But there was, I think, too many things going on in this movie. So Deadpool 2 cannot reach my top 5. Before we go into our top 5, guys, don't forget to leave a like and leave us questions in the chat so we can answer them in a Q&A once Joe and I are done our list. Joe, go ahead and head to your number 5.
My number 5 is Deadpool 2, just one slot above yours. I mean, I will admit a recency bias here, which is I remember Deadpool 2 in much more detail than I remember a lot of the movies that I've just discussed. But I think Deadpool 2 is a very funny movie. I think Deadpool as a character is fantastic. I will say the absolute shock of the first Deadpool is sort of lost in Deadpool 2. It is still very strong in its jokes, although I am sort of on the same page with Max in that it feels like there's a lot going on. And I think that sort of works for this movie, but it is still very fragmented, a lot of different things going on and pivoting at different points. I think that it kind of works for the craziness of the character of Deadpool. Yeah, I think this movie does a very good job with something a lot of movies fail at, which is the trailer doesn't give everything away. You actually have to watch the movie in order to understand what's going on. There are still parts that can surprise you. I think Cable being an absolute villain would have been interesting, but also his character in the comics is more of this anti-hero. And I think Josh Brolin really does nail it. I'm not always the biggest fan of time travel, but they didn't overdo it. And when they did overdo it,
it was funny.
It was very comedic. Yes, Domino was great. The argument of luck being a power was phenomenal because it is a very hard power to prove, yet such a powerful one. Yes, I really enjoyed everything about it. I will say it loses something, and that's hard to gain with such an unpredictable character.
Yeah,
that's my number.
My number 5 is a movie that Joe already brought up, and that is X2, which I do think is easily the strongest movie of the original trilogy by a lot. I love X2. Now we're getting to my top 5. These are movies that I absolutely love. X2 is fantastic. My favorite opening scene in the whole franchise is that White House scene with Nightcrawler. It's so fantastic because you're getting the perspective of the villains, not Nightcrawler, of what is going on. And it kind of feels like a horror thriller type of thing. I mean, it is great. As well, there are so many great characters. As you said, Stryker is actually the best Stryker's ever been. They keep recasting Stryker. It feels like every X-Men movie, but I think Brian Cox does the best job in this movie. I think it's the best Halle Berry has ever been as Storm in this movie as well. And the idea of Magneto escaping prison and being a big part of this near the end of the movie as well was very, very nice to see. As a whole, I really do love this movie. I think that the technology actually does hold up really well with this movie. It's really, really good in my opinion that Fox can nail this movie. This kind of move this franchise in such a positive direction. So X2 for me, is easily in my top 5. Your number 4, Joe.
My number 4 is Days of Future Past. Now, Days of Future Past is a ridiculous movie. It is a movie that has no right to be as good as it is. The plot makes no sense. The title makes no sense. When I watched the trailers for this movie the first time, I had no idea what was going on other than it's an X-Men movie and it's in the future, but it's also in the past. And it's so bizarre, but it's really good. And I think this is sort of where they introduce some of the where they introduce the real timeline shenanigans, which is in the future, the big changes for the new cast of X-Men characters start with the changes made by Wolverine throughout this movie. But I mean, even it's a time travel movie and it's still fascinating. I think the introduction of Kitty Pryde's ability to send a consciousness back in time is sort of out of nowhere, but I don't mind. I think the going back and forth between the future and the past is really strong. The showing how the destructive the human behavior towards the mutants is, they do such a good job of creating this post-apocalyptic world where everyone is enslaved, and the action scenes are great. Of course, this introduces the original, and I don't think it's ever going to be beaten, the original Quicksilver scene. Breaking Magneto out of prison is fantastic. Super speed is if anyone were to give me superpowers, it's what I would want. And I think they do such a good job of conveying how powerful it is and how joyful it can be. I know you're going to talk about it later, so I won't say too much more. But I think it's a really strong movie. And Mystique throughout, Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, her back in her conflicted head between Magneto and Charles is just such a wonderful plot line. I think they really took advantage of having Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique from First Class. Well,
I'm not going to talk about it later because it is my number 4 as well, Joe. So Days of Future Past is a movie that I love. I really do love this movie. A lot of people have it as their number 1. I can't get it there on my ranking, but I do love this movie. I think that some of the reasons why it's not number 1 are some of the time travel rules don't hold up, don't make a lot of sense. And this movie kind of screws the rest of the X-Men franchise. It makes Dark Phoenix not make a lot of sense. It doesn't make Apocalypse make any sense. It really screws up the entire X-Men timeline. as well. But I think that, as you said, Jennifer Lawrence, probably the best she's ever been before she stopped caring about these movies. She was great in Days of Future Past. As you said, like the fact that, when Charles gets in her head in the middle of the movie, I think that works really well as well. Like a really good scene of just not just the metaphorical in your head between those two characters, but the fact that he gets in her head and that's what she can't get out of it. So fascinating to watch. And again, no offense, and again, I really strongly have the MCU over X-Men, but this cast is not going to get any better when you combine these two different cast of actors. These are one of the greatest actors you'll see. Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart. I mean, having Patrick Stewart have a conversation with James McAvoy, like perfect, man. It's just like exactly what you want. Then you have Fassbender and McKellen in the same movie, like so great. I think you also get a good Beast too as well. And, Storm as well coming back in full force is also really good. I really do. It's also very epic and also a really funny movie. Like X-Men movies haven't really been that hilarious, but the idea of Logan walking into Charles's school in like the first act, and he knows everything about them, but Charles and Nicholas Hoult have no idea who this guy is hilarious. And it works for comedy so well in that first act. So honestly, I really do love this movie. It's really tough to put this only at number 4. But again, I think that Mystique, this is the best she's been. I think this is the best Charles Xavier's been in the new movies. And I do love this movie. Let's get into our top 3, Joe. What is your number 3?
My number 3 is the original Deadpool. It's such a great movie. It's hard to say enough good things about it. It's very low stakes for such a grand superhero movie. It is truly Wade Wilson trying to fix his face, and that's it. It's a revenge story. There's no saving the world. It's just about people, and that's pretty rare. But I mean, it's the funniest thing on this list. It's bananas. I had no idea how much I could expect out of this one movie going in. It's crazy in the best way possible. The jokes still make me laugh. I'll rewatch a clip and I'll forget 5 of the millions of references that they can fit into one scene. The fourth wall breaking really works. They do such a good job of conveying how unstable this character is while also being just insane. I'm repeating myself a lot. Ryan Reynolds does an amazing job proving that his work in X-Men Origins could be erased. I also love the addition of Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead. It's not this. It doesn't force the X-Men into this movie, but it does just enough show you that this is the world it's taking place in. Colossus as this sort of trying to be a moral compass to Deadpool, and absolutely it just doesn't work. It's hilarious. Their dynamic is great. The Negasonic Teenage Warhead's sarcasm, everything fits into this movie so well. And I should probably go rewatch it.
Yeah. My number 3 is X-Men First Class. I love this movie. A great movie. It's from the director Matthew Vaughn, who go on to direct the Kingsman movies. I just love, and he directed Kick-Ass. I just love the feel of his movies, and the score too is really great from Henry Jackman. But in general, as we said earlier, this new cast was great. McAvoy and Fassbender have amazing chemistry as Charles and Magneto, which is really tough to beat because McKellen and Stewart had amazing chemistry in the original films. So that's tough to even come close to. And I actually prefer McAvoy and Fassbender over Stewart and McKellen because their chemistry in just all of their movies together are easily the best parts of their movies. I also think the most underrated villain in the X-Men movies is actually Sebastian Shaw, who is played by Kevin Bacon. I actually really enjoy that character more than most people. I think he's a very interesting villain to have in this movie. And again, the whole group, it does feel like a school, which is what I felt like the original movies were missing about Charles's school, was that it just felt like a group where superheroes can meet up. That's what it kind of felt like to me. This movie really made it feel like a school because everyone was so young, especially Charles too. And Charles wasn't in a wheelchair in this movie. And the fact, Magneto deflecting those missiles is one of the best shots you'll ever get in an X-Men movie. In that third act was just completely amazing. Also, the time period, the fact that each new movie takes place 10 years, down the road. I really do love this movie to death. Really tough I can't believe it's not in my top 2, but I love First Class. Joe, what is this, your number 2?
It is my number 2. First Class it does everything the original X-Men does and more. It's so strong. It not only it has a little bit more of an origin story, so they are allowed to go with a little bit more exposition, but it is strong. It's still entertaining. You're following them all the way. 100% agree with you on Shaw being one of the more underrated villains, because his points are the same as Magneto's points later, but he has this added thing where he's just a little bit more of a radicalist. I mentioned how hard it is to do a team-up movie. X-Men First Class has an even bigger challenge of trying to do a team-up movie with a lot of characters that people have never heard of before. Banshee, Havoc, people have heard of Beast, Darwin, Angel, like all of these different characters. And it always keeps you on your toes because it brings together this group of people, but also it's not afraid to immediately shake that group of people up. I do sort of wish that there was a little bit more time for us to know them as a group. So then when one dies or one leaves, it hits harder. But I think it still works. The assault of Shaw and his henchmen on the base is great. Again, it shows this great ideology, which is that they're so close yet so different. I would also be remiss if I did not mention the beach scene, the final battle, the submarine coming out of the water, all of these different moments. Magneto's face-off with Shaw is so emotional to watch because that you understand why he does it. It's so powerful. I mean, even the flashbacks at the beginning of Magneto, his story throughout is so great, and you understand how he and Charles would become friends and also such distinct enemies, because there is sort of this anger in him that helps him connect to Charles, but is also the antithesis of everything that Charles stands for.
Yeah.
I think Jennifer Lawrence is very strong in this movie as well. Although I feel like her purpose is a little bit more to the side, supplementary to Magneto and Professor X's relationship. But also when Magneto takes a stand, shows that he's defeated Shaw and asks who's with him. I think it's just such a well put together movie. I do love Matthew Vaughn from Kingsman and Kick-Ass. I probably have more to say, but it's such a well done origin story for a team. Not to mention the small Hugh Jackman cameo that actually has significance later in Days of Future Past. It's just a great movie.
Yeah, I mean, and also Rose Byrne is in the movie too, and she's really good in it. And again, I think the movie I think it's one of the more focused movies too. There isn't too much going on. You're not really thinking about timelines in the movie. It's just a movie, and I think that's why the movie really works. All
of the timeline shenanigans, I believe First Class does it the best. Days of Future Past is close, but First Class, it taking place in the 60s, works so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. My number 2 is Deadpool. So we have the same number 1. But so Deadpool is a movie that I've never been more pleasantly surprised in a theater in my entire life than Deadpool, because we had such a bad taste of the character from Origins that you didn't know if they would nail it. But then you heard Ryan Reynolds has been working on this project for well over a decade, and you're kind of like, this better be really good. And it was. Like, I love this movie. I think it's easily one of the best superhero movies of the past 10 years. Ryan Reynolds is perfect. He's not Green Lantern in this movie. He is Deadpool. When you watch Ryan Reynolds in a different movie, even Pikachu, you still think Deadpool is talking the whole time, and that's because Ryan Reynolds is so great in this movie. Everyone forgot that he was such a good actor. He's a great actor, and he's so good in the role. But T.J. Miller is a scene stealer as well in both Deadpools as well. Him and Vanessa have a great romance as well in Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2, obviously, but she really isn't in it in Deadpool 2. And I think the whole Joe and Gina Carano, who is in The Mandalorian, she's also a badass as the sidekick to the villain in this movie. She's really good. Her and Colossus's fight was hilarious in that third act. And again, I think that the villain, I really enjoyed the villain. I think that he was a very personal villain to Deadpool, because Deadpool went from, he has cancer, super heartbreaking. What is he going to do? He has to become this superhero. And, you know, the whole joke, the Francis joke is awesome. Like, I love the Francis joke throughout the movie, but it's also a pretty disturbing movie because I don't think anyone thought how violent a superhero movie could be. Because at the time, you know, Blade was pretty violent, but at the time, superhero movies just weren't this violent. And it was a very violent movie. Especially with the whole joke of Deadpool cutting off his arm, his like, you know, like 127 hours, and it coming back as a baby hand was hilarious too. The old woman who he stays with is also a scene stealer when she is on screen. So overall, I do just love the first Deadpool, and it's gonna be interesting to see what they do with the character, because obviously now he's a part of Disney, which isn't that violent at all. So is Deadpool even gonna come back? That's the big question mark. But let's talk about our number 1, Logan, directed by James Mangold, who is now become the biggest director and one of the biggest directors because of this movie and Ford versus Ferrari. I love this movie. We can just go back and forth on it. This is the best Hugh Jackman has ever been in his acting career, in my opinion. And he is so damn good as a grizzled Logan. And the young woman too, the young girl, she's fantastic. Daphne Keane. She is also a badass, and you don't really see kids be badasses in movies anymore. She was great in the movie. I also thought the villains were pretty. No one talks about those villains that often. Really fascinating villains to the movie, but it's also just and also the best Patrick Stewart has ever been as Charles Xavier. It's just all of the best coming together in a rated R Logan movie.
It's such a beautiful send-off. It doesn't actually act as a send-off, but it's such a beautiful send-off to the X-Men. And I believe I saw Chilling Movies bring up this point. I absolutely agree. If it was the end, it would have worked. It's because Hugh Jackman and Sir Patrick Stewart, those are the two actors we've been following in all of the X-Men movies. They are the actors. I mean, you have the rest of the X-Men, but they die or they get recast.
Yeah,
these two are so iconic as these two roles, and I will admit, I was so sad when Professor X died in that moment, especially when he thinks he's talking to Logan. It's such a great way to end his arc, and also such a sad way to do it as well. I will say I didn't mention this last week when we were talking about non-Marvel MCU. That's because it's such a good movie that I sometimes forget it's an X-Men movie. It's just it's a fantastic movie, and it doesn't rely on any pre-established. I mean, it has these comic characters, but it's so not a comic book movie and such a different type of story that it's so engaging to watch. I also love X-23. She's a badass, and her connection with Logan throughout the film, and then eventually when he dies, that it really gives you the sense that even without Hugh Jackman, X-Men could carry on, but it could have been the end right there, and that would have been satisfying.
And I also love it because it feels like an independent film across, like, different from all the other movies. Like, it doesn't feel like it just fits into the X-Men franchise. It feels like its own movie. Like, it's very on its own. Like, we get these big Marvel movies, but they just feel like MCU movies, even though we love them. Like, another Captain America movie, another Iron Man movie, another Thor. It just feels like another MCU movie. This movie distinguishes itself so well from the rest of the franchise, and that's a credit to the directing from Mangold, the look of the movie. It's such a step up over the Wolverine, because as we said earlier, it's a very forgettable, the first one. This movie's so damn good, and also just the way it looks too. As I said, it's a gritty movie. It feels like a Western too at times. Like, it's so old school, and it needed to be R. It needed to be rated R. And I wish more superhero movies, for example, the big one that I always think about that should have been R was Venom. Venom desperately needed to be an R rating. I mean, can you imagine Logan not being R? It wouldn't be the same movie. So, and it was great from Fox to trust the filmmakers because Deadpool was R and it made a lot of money. So they realized that we're not losing the fans, so let's just make it R. And it made it more violent, which is what the franchises desperately needed. And it brought a different vibe to Logan.
Yeah.
As a whole.
The age on the characters is also something that's so well done, which is that they age so well. Like, the older Professor X and the older Logan sort of outliving the rest of the X-Men. I will say also the bit about the X-Men comics being in universe, that was very strong. Because it also gives the sense, it's like, well, it wasn't that bright and happy. I can't say enough good stuff about Sir Patrick Stewart in this movie. His declining mental state was so powerful throughout the movie, and then also Logan being his caretaker. Even Caliban, who wasn't a huge part, who wasn't like a character we'd ever heard of before, he fit so perfectly into the world that they created. Yeah. I also like that it dealt with the future of mutants being all of these mutant children, and it's just this great combination of the past and the future.
It's a near perfect movie, and arguably the best superhero movie that we've gotten in the past 10 years, in my opinion. Like, arguably it might be up there with Avengers Endgame, and obviously as a movie, it doesn't feel like a superhero movie, which is one of the biggest reasons why I love Christopher Nolan's Batman, because it doesn't feel like a Batman movie. It feels like a realistic movie that could actually happen. This movie, maybe not to that level, but it just feels like its own thing.
There's no formula. There was no guaranteed success in this movie, and it absolutely works.
And I do believe that it should have been nominated for Best Picture. I think it was great that it got screenplay, but I thought Patrick Stewart easily should have been nominated as well for Best Supporting Actor. It's a really fantastic movie and a great way to end. You want to keep adding on, or are we good?
I mean, we could keep going. There is a whole 2 hours to talk about, but I'm good to end it here. It's just
such a great movie. And it's sad that we'll never get to see, probably not, Hugh Jackman. Also, we didn't even talk about his death. That was so powerful, Joe. I mean,
I briefly mentioned it, but it is.
And that's why Deadpool 2, the joke was funny, because we were all crying in the theater when he died, and then Deadpool 2 make the joke of it in the beginning, which is hilarious. Chilling movie says, I do agree, Venom being rated R, it should have been. because Venom needed to be violent, and this movie needed to be violent. Such a masterpiece. I'm glad it was rated R. It's no one talks about that. There was before Deadpool, there was no rated R superhero movies really at the time, and the fact that Deadpool and Logan have probably changed the landscape of rated R movies for superheroes is great too. So we're gonna end it there. We have 5 minutes left, so if you guys please put in some questions, give me some other opinions on the X-Men franchise. We have 5 minutes here. I'm going to be going through the comments right now. We do have some people talking. Chilling Movie says his favorite X-Men movies are First Class, Days of Future Past, X2, and Logan. Those are my top 5 as well. I do love those movies. Chilling also says Last Stand, although bad, I did enjoy it. Interesting. X-Men Origins, very bad and forgettable. I do agree. The Wolverine one was all right. Nothing special. Again, these are all very good points. Chilling. Having talked about all of these movies, are there any you want to go back and watch again? I mean, Joe, you want to go first?
Yeah, I got a few. I mean, I'm not particularly engaged in going back to see the Wolverine, but I mean, maybe it's better than I remember it. X2, from what I've heard from Max and in the comments, I definitely need to rewatch. Also, and then I said this, Deadpool it's just such a fantastic movie, and I do want to watch it again now. What about you, Max?
Man, it's tough because I've seen a lot of these. I've seen Dark Phoenix now a lot for some reason. It's on HBO all the time, so I'm just put it on. I've seen like 4 or 5 times now. But I always love rewatching. As you said, X2 is a great movie to rewatch. It's a very underrated movie. First Class, I just love rewatching because it puts me back in a different time period, and I love that about that movie. And I mean, how can you not rewatch Logan? I mean, it's the best one. I mean, it's so tough. I mean, I wish more superhero films were like that. I know Birds of Prey was R. Yep. The Batman would be rated R, and same with the Suicide Squad. Birds of Prey needed to be, and Suicide Squad was R as well, just because of cursing. They just wanted Margot Robbie to curse. Why Logan needed to be R because of the violence. The movie was a gritty Western where while it wasn't just like Deadpool violent, it needs to be this physically real violence, right, Joe?
Also, Logan's powers are so graphic. I mean,
yeah,
his bones are knives. You
yeah.
can't take his abilities to their fullest potential if you don't allow blood and gore, because you know his claws are sharp. His other power is based around being destroyed in order to heal himself. And he puts himself in such danger because he has this guaranteed healing factor, which is then not guaranteed. I mean, it would be very hard to pull off, or at least to take Wolverine seriously, if he's not allowed to go nuts.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to go a bit over because we have 2 great questions coming in. Rusty Spork, Fox X-Men has to come to an end. It is over. Are there any characters or story arcs you'd like to see Disney explore in the future? The main thing I want to say for Disney is that Magneto needs to be done differently, in my opinion, of the way that in every movie, he starts off as the good guy, then goes to the bad guy in the middle of the movie, and then becomes the good guy at the end of the movie. I think the actual arc of his character needs to be changed because, especially in those new X-Men movies, Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, it feels like we've seen that his character arc a billion times already. So that's my main issue with the X-Men movies, that it feels like Magneto does the same thing in every movie. Even though he's my favorite superhero in this franchise, I want to see a more unique arc for his character. Joe?
I can't think of a specific story arc, but I think in terms of characters, I definitely want to see younger characters, because Spider-Man is so great, but he's the only teenage superhero we have. And Marvel Comics just has so many young superheroes, and having the X-Men School for the Gifted, it's a school. It's such a great way to have characters, younger characters with superpowers, introduced into the world without, having to make them real superheroes just yet. I think there's a lot that can be done with teenage superheroes. I do agree with you. Magneto's story arc should be a little less repetitive. I think if Marvel is going to bring him in, he should be a little bit more of a character with swaying allegiances, like a little bit more, I guess maybe like a Loki character almost. I feel like that's kind of what Magneto would need to be.
Yeah. And then our last question from Chilling. Thanks, Chilling, for being so supportive today. What do you think about the X-Men coming to the MCU? So, yeah, I mean, they are coming to the MCU. For me, I'm very divisive on it because it's going to put a lot of pressure because they are going to recast the newest members of the cast. So this is already the third, basically, casting of these characters. And it feels like it's going to be tough because, let's talk, for example, whoever plays Professor X has a big shoes to fill from both James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart. I mean, now we're getting into these points where how many more times are we going to recast X-Men? Because it is going to be tough because people are falling in love with not just the original cast, with the new cast, not even the new cast anymore because we're going to get a new cast here. I'm nervous, but I trust Kevin Feige because he's just one of the best producers in probably the best producer in superhero history. And I think he'll do a good job, but I'm nervous because we just got these new characters and they're done now already. I'm nervous.
It is a very much a tightrope walk because also just in how they're going to introduce these characters because they've had their own adventures, so people know them. The audiences know them in this context, so they're going to have to introduce them in a new way to show the audience like this isn't the X-Men that you've known before. Mm-hmm. But also, there are a finite number of ways that they can introduce the X-Men at this point because they've already done so much to establish the Marvel Universe. They can retcon X-Men into the Marvel Universe, but that's risky. They can also introduce them as like an emerging thing. That's also risky. I do have faith in Marvel. I mean, Tom Holland was the third recasting of Spider-Man, and he knocked it out of the park.
The one difference with that is that not all fans loved Tobey Maguire or Garfield. Like
that
I think
is true.
The amount of love, not for both casts, like fans love both of the casts. That's gonna be really tough to bring that magic for a third time.
I think it would be difficult, and I am certainly not one to say that I could do it. But I think Marvel has had such a carefully laid framework where they can include all of these different things. They've got to know how to include the X-Men. I have a feeling that they've known that they want these characters back for a long time. They're really popular characters, and seeing those characters interacting with the characters we've come to know and love in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's going to be great. It's just a matter of how it's going to be great. And I want that to be the case. Yeah.
I mean, are we going to get a new Logan? Like, that is going to be a tough task, too, if they bring another actor to do Wolverine after Hugh Jackman did it for 17 years. Like, it's going to be tough, but, again, I want to see it. Like, when they pop on screen, I'm going to lose my mind in the theater when they pop on screen. I think we all will. But once again, we are over time. I want to thank you guys so much for joining us on another Live on Air with Joe Baldwin and Max Dinenberg. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd in the comment section down below. My accounts are down there. Before I go, I'll tell you my upcoming videos and my past videos that I just uploaded. This coming Monday, I have 2 reviews for you guys. I have my spoiler review of episode 5 of Lovecraft Country, and then my spoiler review of episodes 1 through 5 of Raised by Wolves. So you guys can look out for those 2 videos coming on Monday. And then this past week on Thursday, I reviewed the brand new HBO Max movie on Pregnant, and then I reviewed the brand new Netflix movie, The Babysitter 2, Killer Queen, on this YouTube channel. So you guys can all check those out. Thank you guys once again for joining us. That has been Joe Baldwin. I'm Max Sandberg. Once again, we have been live on